Cinder is here, but thank you, appreciate it. Hi, Cinder.
Hi.
Good, late morning, early afternoon-ish. We're ready to go. We know that you have a tight schedule, so thank you for making yourself available.
Sure.
And for those folks watching at home, Cindy McNerney, the financial advisor.
Financial advisor to the city. I'm a managing director at First Southwest Company in Boston. And we've served as financial advisor to the city for quite a number of years. As financial advisor, we assist the city in connection with the issuance of debt, access to the market, coordinating everybody associated with bond and note transactions primarily. So I'm happy to answer any questions or to give my own perspective on what's going on with the city's credit. When, in connection with the issuance of debt, the city's credit rating is reviewed by the rating agencies, and you can't really issue the debt without a credit rating. And so we're specialized in what goes into evaluating credit as well as how to issue and structure debt. And we've been structuring the city's debt with the city. Obviously, the city's authorized all of the debt that's on its books right now, and is looking at what infrastructure investment it needs to make in the next several years. And we've been working with the city on the timing and to assist the city in managing how to structure that debt so that it can be brought on with the least impact for the taxpayer. Well, in terms of the city's credit, the city's got stellar credit. We're currently rated AA+, which is one notch below the highest AAA rating that's possible with Standard & Poor's. And your outlook on that credit is stable. It's a solid AA+ right now. The city's finances have improved in the last several years in a number of different ways. With I think you've adopted the fiscal policies that the city has at this point. Those are fully adopted. That's a big big accomplishment from the perspective of the rating agencies. I mean, we're primarily interested in both the rating agencies and investors, but the investors look at how the rating agencies think. The city was most recently rated in January, and we now got a AA+. Perhaps a couple of years ago might have been at risk, but that's a very solid AA+ right now. But I don't think the city can rest on its laurels. I mean, there's some work to be done relative to the magnitude of the unfunded pension and the unfunded OPEB liability that the city's got. And that's probably the biggest issue that, will become more important in terms of what's the plan to address both and get in a better position as other municipalities do whatever they're doing and are under pressure. It's something that all municipalities are under the same pressure to deal with those two particular unfunded liabilities and develop a plan. And to the extent that no plan is developed, I think that could, ultimately could undermine all the progress. But right now, the city's doing, it's making, it's committed in managing its investment in its infrastructure. It's obvious when you just even, I haven't been down to Quincy in a while. The city looks absolutely beautiful coming into the downtown, all the investment that's been made here. The reserve position is stronger than it was in 15. We just got a hold of the fiscal 16 audit yesterday, so I really haven't had much of a chance to look at it, but it is definitely an improvement in terms of reserve position over fiscal 15. Which got hit a little bit on account of snow deficit primarily. And the city's doing a lot of things. It's not just the fiscal policies, it's the multi-year projections and forecasting that has lent itself to planning for the future and delivering on the plan. And it's critical that the city, if you look at the most recent credit report, which was issued in January of this year, it's critical that the city live by adhere to the policies that it's created for itself. We review them annually to make sure that those are the policies that make sense for the city, but that the administration and the council all pay attention to those policies. So what else? I think that From my perspective, I know that the city is very interested in managing the tax impact of any decisions. From my perspective, since I don't live here, I don't pay taxes, and I'm primarily focused more on things like credit and what might be an opportunity for the city. You've got, and I've said this many years in a row, got a lot of, and it's an unpopular thing, you've got a lot of unused levy capacity. There's an opportunity there that to consider how that might come into play relative to, in particular, the unfunded long-term liabilities that the city is going to need to address. I don't look at the detail of your budget. I primarily look at your operating results and that's how investors look at your operating results from year to year. Your debt service, I know that's been a question that people have asked before. The unfunded pension and OPEB liability becomes part of the evaluation of debt. But the actual debt in the form of bonds and notes that the city's got is not an issue from the rating agency perspective. In fact, they think the net debt, that's supported by taxes, they consider that to be low. But they do consider that the only, in their credit report, they look at what could raise the rating and versus what could lower the rating. So the only thing that they see that would lower the rating would be reduction in reserve position. They're looking for it to strengthen, and they would be to not address the unfunded liabilities. What would increase the rating, and that would be take the city to a AAA at this point, which is an interesting thing that we're talking about that because a couple of years ago we were talking about protecting the AA+. But what could move the rating up would be improving increasing, not improving the reserve position. I think they refer to it as adequate. What would be to beef that up and to consider how you might plan to do that. So in a nutshell, the city's AA+ is an absolutely stellar credit rating, and it's reflected in the rates that the city borrows, and the city's got, from our perspective, a solid plan for infrastructure investment, and it's going to pay off to be that AA+ rating on all of the debt that the city's issuing. The only other thing I can say is the city does a really good job of managing the use of short-term notes and then the issue of bonding, so that as debt is falling off the city's books, the city is filling it up with with bringing on the debt that it had issued in notes to permanently finance those. And it's doing it with very little impact on the debt service line item. In terms of the general fund. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I haven't, I didn't really have, I wasn't sure if you wanted me specifically to prepare something more than just to talk to you generally. But the city's in a very favorable position right now.
So thank you again for making the time. I know, as we had kind of conversed back and forth, it's a tough time of the year for people's schedules, and hence why we're having a day meeting. So appreciate you, shifting some things around to come here, and just a couple things. And yeah, right. As city councilors, we're obviously the stewards of the people's resources, and one thing that we're always trying to do, along with the administration, is manage affordability for the city, right? With growth, because as the city has matured over the last 150 years, maybe some of the needs weren't being addressed incrementally. So essentially, you're at a point where you have to make decisions. But that being said, it's also important to acknowledge how do you manage a responsible tax base where you're not overburdening the homeowner. So that's obviously a constant thing that we do up here, almost bi-weekly. So I'm just kind of curious, because I know that you had mentioned some of the benefits and the retirement stuff that isn't, again, it's not isolated or unique to the city of Quincy. I mean, you look at nationally, in cities, towns, states are dealing with those types of liabilities. But as the financial advisor, that we make, I think it's $250,000 commitment to maybe the pension and $100,000 to OPEB, or I think it's that, or it's that in reverse. Is that adequate? What are kind of your thoughts on that? I know it's a big liability, but
Well, I think it's 600 or $650 million. It's not, $100,000 isn't going to get anybody very far with that. And it's not clear cut, what I think that a lot of municipalities are, and Quincy will be compared to its peers in what they're doing. A lot of municipalities are starting to develop concrete plans that are real plans.
so that's kind of where I'm going with this question.
Well, a lot are actually are looking into it at a minimum as to developing a real plan. So when Standard & Poor's looks at, a lot of municipalities are taking the position when we fund our unfunded pension liability, we'll pick up what we were using for that. We'll pay that for the unfunded OPEB at that point in time. I don't even know if the cash flows can wait until that. I mean, in Quincy's case, I think your unfunded pension liability is currently scheduled to be amortized by 2036. I don't know that it can wait until 2036 to start picking up heavily funding OPEB, which is $650 million liability right now. Because I think the cash flow requirements might not permit that. I'm not sure. I think that's something that each municipality, not just Quincy, needs to take a look at what it is, and it becomes then part of the contract negotiations also. I mean, pension, the state requires a pension be funded on, a plan that's approved by the state by 2040. OPEB, there is no plan right now. There's lots of discussion about the state starting to mandate something. The Standard & Poor's doesn't recognize it as a plan to start picking up the cost of OPEB after pension is funded. That they don't do that as a plan. They would like to see, and I think investors nationwide are paying more attention, especially now as the unfunded liabilities are starting to be recorded on the balance sheet inside the audited financial statements. I think that investors and the rating agencies will start to take a lot more notice as to who's doing what. And, it's important to, and I think the city's done a lot. The city's made great strides in evaluating itself, looking at its budget, looking at its future. I think that this is probably the next step. It's the same thing. It's the next step for all municipalities right now. But it is the issue that is going to be the deal breaker if it's not addressed for everybody. But some municipalities are getting aggressive. Others are going to take their time. I think in the last rating report, what could move the rating down would be to not address it. Now they don't say what time frame, but it's to not address it, and to, if reserves were to be decreased.
And again, retirement benefits are extremely important, to folks that serve the city. So recognizing that, I'm just kind of curious, as you sort of talk through that, how do we get better at servicing what we have? It sounds to me that it's just.
Well, it's my bad answer again. It's the one that you've got 20 some odd million of unused levy capacity under the lower levy limit of up to 2.5. I mean, from an outside perspective, it's affordable to use some of that, but from an internal perspective, probably from the administration and the city council, that's not, and you try to balance everything, but dealing with the unfunded pension and OPEB, your pension fund, last I saw, that's in the last disclosure that we've had, is only 45% funded. I think that, and that's on a schedule, but it's only 45%. So, that's the challenge right now. But it's the same challenge everybody is dealing with, and you've got to fit it into the forward planning. Right now, the city is looking at doing a lot of forward planning. And it's coming to the front of the top, it's going to become the top priority at some point in the next couple of years. So it's, if Quincy's peers do more to address it sooner than Quincy does, then the rating agencies will react to whatever Quincy's doing. So, I think that you don't want to necessarily be the first to deal with it, but I think that to the extent that you look at what you're dealing with and what it's going to take to deal with it and evaluate it and consider whether or not you can really honor all that OPEB commitment, or if it's going to be something that's worked out in multiple, the next decade of contract negotiations, is something that every municipality is taking a look at, because you've got to plan ahead. It used to be that the rating agencies would look at the last, 3 to 5 years of history, and that's a good way to project what's happening in the future. But right now, they've turned since the Great Recession, their focus is really turned on the future and how much planning is going on, whether or not you've got fiscal policies. And Quincy's doing everything right. You wouldn't be a solid AA+ if you weren't. But the issue, the big elephant, I think I referred to that exact same way last time. So the big elephant in the room is going to be the unfunded OPEB is, pensions on a schedule. There's no schedule on the OPEB, and it's $650 million. It's got to be looked at and evaluated what's realistic and what are we going to do about it. And you're right, kicking the can down the road is there's a lot of lost opportunity if that's the approach, because Quincy's got tremendous capacity with this unused levy capacity. I know nobody wants to use it, but you do have tremendous capacity to tap into it a little bit more, to evaluate that as to what's fair in terms of using any of that. With that, at the same time as you invest and maintain infrastructure, at the same time as you grow and maintain the reserve position as a percent of your expenditures, and at the same time you provide city services, at the same time you're cognizant and respectful of the constraints for some people relative to the level of taxation. That is exactly the conversation that every municipality that's planning ahead is having right now.
So you feel in the next maybe 2 to 3 years, the rating agencies are going to be looking for something that's actually memorialized in terms of a plan, like here's how we're going to.
I don't know that, I think they're going to want to know what the community understands about what it's doing and what it can do and what the options are. I don't know that, I think they'd like to see some progress in terms of, not necessarily fully funding it, but funding it, maybe growing the funding from year to year. Those are the kinds of things we are seeing with some communities that are addressing it, but it's really a difficult, it's a really big subject. So it's first you got to, get with the actuary and understand what's going on there.
Does your firm actually produce those actuarial assumptions, or is that a third party?
No, we're not. We work with actuaries, but no, that's a separate specialty.
Yeah.
And expertise. Yeah, no, we don't do that.
It's interesting. Just conversation in general. Benefits are very important and deserved, quite honestly, for those men and women that serve the city of Quincy. I'm just always, how do we get better, right? That's why you're here in a nutshell. Share with us what we're doing well and areas we can get better, I think, at least from my lens. But I want to have a conversation. I don't know if other councils have questions. Council Yang?
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Madison. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to come in today. I just have a couple of questions for you. So you talked about the financial policies that we had adopted, and I know that the purpose of that is to really sort of codify how our city spends, from administration to administration, from councilors to councilors. It just sort of says this is going to be our spending habit, no matter who sitting up here in the well. In that financial policy package that we put together, we had talked about allocating 20% of available free cash to stabilization. So one of the goals is to increase our stabilization fund. And of course, the other, like you had mentioned, is really trying to address this OPEB issue that we're having here. And so with the new policy, we're going to be adding $100,000 to what we currently have at 1.4 million. And you're saying that the end goal, sort of where we will be to be all set, essentially, with that fund is at 600 million?
That the last actuarial report on the unfunded OPEB liability was $650 million. That's $600 million. Your unfunded pension liability is something like $400. I think the two combined were about $1 billion.
And that number is only going to increase every year as more folks are retiring and coming off payroll, correct?
I don't know if it's going to. It depends on the investment returns on the assets. So right now you've got a set amount of assets associated with the pension system because you are a funding schedule, and there's an assumption about the rate of return. of those investments, and I don't know what those are returning right now. I mean, that is on a schedule that gets resized every 3 years, I think it is, or maybe more often. But the OPEB liability that's unfunded has no, well, it's got $1.4 million, you're telling me, in assets that, that's not going to produce much income. I mean, you have to, it doesn't have any, so what you're putting into it until you amass something that can start to earn income and help with the situation is something that needs to be looked at with the actuary, considered by the administration in terms of what's going on, considered by the city council. I mean, there's a lot to, it would probably be a step-by-step approach in terms of just at least not ignore, at least really evaluate what are some options with regard to dealing with this.
And that's something I wanted to talk to you about as well, is that, what are some other options to build that fund and get us to a better place for our credit rating? And I mean, there's no way we can just put in $650 million to cover this. And again, the stuff that we are taking with the financial model, or policy, I should say, to add 1,000 and sort of incremental additions to the account, start building it. You had said that when it gets to a certain amount, when it builds to a certain number, we can start making some money off of that and earning an income off of it. Do you have a number or a percentage of that 650 in mind that we should, strive for, that we should try to achieve?
Well, there's numbers in the actuarial evaluation report that would suggest what numbers need to be put in. But I think that what needs to be evaluated, so the city needs to consider what it could put in, what it might earn once it started to amass monies, and to evaluate the benefits and how to deal with the benefits, whether or not the benefits are too beneficial in terms of health, and if they're sustainable. I mean, one of the, is it realistic that the commitments have been made relative to health benefits? Is that realistic to just deliver on that without reconsidering the benefits for retirees and employees? It's something that everybody's looking at. How can you say we get two sides of the equation? And it's really complicated. It's not something that I know how it's looked at from a rating perspective. You need to get your actuary in here talking to you about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And are there other things that we can do then? Because, like you said, you're looking at it from a credit rating standpoint. And again, with this policy, we're trying to increase stabilization. We're making an effort towards OPEB and that account. What else can we do outside to bump up our credit rating? I mean, there must be more outside of those two things that credit agencies are looking at to say, what is the city going to be rated at? There's, I'm sure, a slew of things outside of these two things. So can we build up possibly on those other items while we're working to resolve this issue?
You do have the challenge to build your reserves as you go forward, but you've been doing so many things that are positive in the last several years. To develop and establish policies and adhere to them is a huge issue an accomplishment, because you can't do that without understanding your needs. And so the city's taken a big effort to understand its needs in terms of, what its revenue sources might be going forward. Even though you go really on expenditures, it has to look at its revenues to diversify the revenues, grow the revenues, and to consider what the investment is needed in terms of infrastructure. And the city's developed a capital plan, a rolling capital plan at this point. The city's doing a lot of forward planning. It's an economic development plan. The city is doing a lot of things on all fronts right now that all have contributed to, for one, the unused levy capacity growing to the extent that it has, and and also to manage spending. But at the same time, you've got the big thing that will block you from ever improving the rating would be the unfunded pension liability, unfunded OPEB liability. That you run without dealing with that with sort of a multi-year, multi-decade plan. That I don't see the rating moving to the AAA unless reserves were grown to a huge amount. But I don't think and I think reserves need to grow more. They're called adequate right now. They should be good or strong in terms of how they're viewed, but they are considered adequate. And the unused levy capacity part of the thinking of the, how much reserve position the city has. Because that can just, you don't need to go do a vote referendum to access that money. And the city's shown some willingness to use that. I think last year there was some use of it. And from a rating agency perspective, again, that's positive. But I don't think, the big issue is the unfunded liabilities. The city's been doing and making progress steadily year after year after year at this point in terms of all these other things. It's created a lot of different kinds of tools, including the fiscal policies and the capital improvement plan and the projections. You're maintaining and repairing infrastructure that had been deferred, as you had mentioned. You're doing a lot of things, and that's not what's causing some of the pressure. The pressure is going to come on with regard to what you got to contribute to pension and OPEB. So there's,
Are we doing anything else?
Address it sooner than later, because if you address it later, you're going to be that much more squeezed.
Okay, and you talked about spending. Just real quickly, it says here that the debt service should be between 6 and 7.5%. We're projected next year in fiscal year 18 to be at 5.26. Does that hurt us, or is that okay? That's below the 6 to 7.5.
It's good. You just don't want to go above that range.
So long as you're under that, you're fine. Anywhere under that.
As
You
long
can
as
get
you're under
2%.
it, you're living within the goal that you set for yourselves. I mean, if in fact the city had even more infrastructure need, and we had modeled it out to show that you needed to have a higher, some municipalities, depending on the size of them, have a higher range than that. I think the city evaluated what would be reasonable for it. I mean, all of the fiscal policies that you've adopted need to be reconsidered as you go forward. If all of a sudden you had you didn't get the kind of revenue that you're getting right now in terms of new growth revenue or whatever else, in terms of revenue from your various sources, you'd have to reconsider whether or not some of the parameters that you set forth as reasonable or adequate. The rating agency, Standard & Poor's, who has the AA+ rating, has a app that they put out in connection with the rating methodology that they came up with a couple of years ago. And they basically ding you on how they evaluate the rating if you're not adhering to the rating policies that you set for yourself. First, they ding you if you have no policies, and then they ding you if you're not adhering to your policies. And so you can almost get an indicative rating from how your financial results come out each year. But then they have some subjective decreases or increases to their metric scores that they apply depending upon if you set a goal of you want a 5% stabilization fund and you only had one or you started to deplete it, they would ding you for not meeting your goal if that was your minimum threshold. So right now, I think that the city's fiscal policies are good for where the city's at now, and I think that in the next year or two probably need to make sure all the time, make sure that there's nothing. I know the city's doing that now with what it's improved. It's doing so many different things to check how it's spending against what it's budgeted and how its revenues are coming in versus what it estimated. So the city's very on time with itself in terms of how it's performing. So I think it knows it's within these limits that it's set for its fiscal policies.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you. I know again that this OPEB fund, the reserve is going to be an ongoing issue, but I appreciate you letting us know that we are doing everything else that we can outside of that to really build and maintain our credit rating. I know that the excess levy capacity is going to be an issue. It's also brought up to us every year that we should tap into that and tax more. But of course, on our end of it, even as residents in the city, we have to be mindful of what that number looks like. And $50, $75, $100 makes a huge difference to a lot of folks. So I appreciate you, giving some input as to what else we should be doing outside of that, as opposed to tapping into that, the levy capacity. So thank you again for your time, and thank you for always giving your input. It's important that we hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Council King.
Oh, thank you. I just have two quick questions. What municipalities are setting the gold standard for financial policies or attending and other liability?
There are so many municipalities now that have financial policies that have been adopted by the city council or town meeting. In terms of OPEB, there's only a few.
I mean, if that's the greatest area of weakness, who's attending to that investment?
There's something I heard the other day that's practically funded. Can you think of anybody? I can get you a list. You know, we work with probably 150 of the municipalities in the state, so. I'd have to, there are definitely communities that have a plan. I mean, I live in a small community, we put in 500,000 2 years ago, and we put in 250,000 each year since. And they were committed to 250,000 a year, and 14,000 people. And we're doing that.
Yeah.
And our average tax bill is higher, and perhaps, we've got the same kind of issues. The last couple of years, there's been so much new growth everywhere, there's been excess revenue coming in. When you have a situation like that, there's an opportunity for the stabilization of the OPEB. You don't really get as much credit, not that this matters, but from the rating agency, if you put it into OPEB and it's insufficient to constitute a claim. But there are a couple of municipalities that are going to have their OPEB and the pension taken care of in the next 5 years. There's a couple, and they're probably extremely wealthy communities. I have to take a look. There's some communities that really are just plain wealthy.
Yeah.
But they've also, AA plus for Quincy, your tax base is, you got a powerhouse of a tax base, and you are considered, you don't get to AA plus without the consideration that base. And the unused levy capacity is even more reflection of, you got that much more, you got a huge amount over that in terms of what the primary levy. So, it's a big resource. I know nobody wants to use it, but it's been growing over many years too. So, it's hard for somebody like me to keep bringing it up, but you've got that right there that you can tap into a little bit. I mean, most places like my town would love to have an example capacity.
Yeah.
We don't have any.
But it's about offsetting with the revenues that we pay for the debt service, right?
What's that?
It's about offsetting with revenues to pay the debt service on using that capacity. If we're going to flow more bonds, we need more revenue.
No, you don't.
So that we don't put it on. Well, the point is that none of us are wanting to be in a position to increase tax burden on taxpayers, right?
But the city has a plan, has put together a plan for the next $100+ million of infrastructure needs over the next, in the capital plan in the next 5-6 years, that doesn't really raise the debt service costs. Because you've got debt coming off, and you're using short-term notes while the debt's falling off, and you're selling bonds, sort of wrapping it around the debt that's coming down. So the debt service isn't growing like you might be thinking. You might be authorizing debt, but the payback on the debt is not changing. We've seen models that show it out through the final maturity of 30-year debt. It's taking on all the debt, but it's not, from a budgetary perspective, it's not adding a significant amount of debt service on the general fund, which is supported by the general fund debt, which is supported by the tax levy. No, it's not. That's not happening. It's in a very manageable way. And at the same time, we're investing in infrastructure needs that otherwise would be deferred and probably cost more down the road to avoid it.
Yeah.
So, no, it's just, you've got one of the largest unused levy capacities under the lower levy in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And it's an opportunity at the same time as, it could be a burden. Obviously, you're not going to go tax another $20 million. But when you don't tax it, you leave $21 million on the table every single year. So if you tax $1 million of it, in 10 years, that'd be $10 million that will come into it in something. Whether it's reserve position to give you more flexibility to make things happen, or whether or not it's to start funding the OPEB liability. I mean, the way you fund the OPEB liability, you have to pay it out at a certain point. It's going to start negatively impacting the budget down the road. It's something that has to be discussed in the municipality. There are no assets for it. Pension is the same thing. Because, the pension piece has, I'm not sure what the number is. We've got a lot of assets. But if in fact that the market's going to perform at this point, but you've got nothing that you're investing in.
But I'd still be, if you have list of, you know, how other municipalities are doing that well.
Well, a lot of, so the way that other municipalities are doing is they're creating a line item in their budget that's for OPEB. You know, start funding it, $500,000 a year. You don't even have to cut out something else to do it, you could just levy it with the unused levy capacity and still have over $20 million of unused levy capacity. You know, you need some of that unused levy capacity to manage your budget. So, I mean, the whole issue of, you know, managing the impact on the taxpayer takes into consideration the whole picture, which is all the revenues and all the expenditures and the capital plan and maintaining reserves that are adequate or, you know, to maintain this AA+ rating that the city's got. There are, right now, with Standard & Poor's in Massachusetts, there's about 60 AAAs. Then there's probably, I'm guessing, maybe 30 AA+. And then there's a lot of AA's, and then there's some AA-, and then there's something that go down into the A category. AA+, you know, very, you know, it's right up there. At this point, since you've had it, you are at risk of losing it. You've solidified all of how you operate. You're now very solid with the AA+. It's a good place to, at a minimum, to maintain this as you go forward and make decisions that reflect what AA+ communities and AAA communities are doing. You know, and which is primarily making decisions that show that you can sustain yourselves structurally without drawing on reserves going forward. You know, and that's really a sort of challenge. I don't definitely know. You know, I mean, it's a challenge. Each municipality is different. I mean, you've got different opportunities that other municipalities don't have. Other municipalities might have different kinds of wealth that you don't have. Other communities don't have opportunities. They don't have wealth. They don't have anything. They're really struggling. They're much more relying on state aid. You know, and that's, you know, and so. And their infrastructure, because that's one of the first things that goes when you don't have capacity, their infrastructure is becoming deferred. The property value is increasing, and that's sort of the other complete extreme opposite side of being as strong as the city of Quincy is. So it's all about planning at this point, planning ahead.
Council LaForest?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Senator, it's great to hear such a positive outlook for our community. Hearing we have sound financial policies, a lot of the good work's been done by the administration. This was a different conversation a few years ago. Great to see our bond rating climbing. I just wanted to follow up with you. Part of our financial policies was adopting our debt ratio, which we are below the threshold of. We do have two major capital improvement projects before us, and as well as the park improvement bond with the motel tax. Are you familiar with those two? It's a $27 million, and then a subsequent $27 million with the parks to be funded by motel, and then $25 million with the capital improvement plan. I just wanted to talk about your comfort level in our, whether those are things you see us as, we talk about the integrated infrastructure, we talk about bond, the rating agencies considering what we are doing as far as the investment into our infrastructure. Our conversations with a lot of these department heads as we were coming up is how integrated a lot of our infrastructure is, and this is being able to upgrade and invest in our community. What is your comfort level with us taking on that additional bond capacity?
Well, easy for me to say I'm really comfortable because I'm not paying it back. But I've looked at how it's planned, the plan to issue it. Usually I would not be comfortable if I thought it was going to have some kind of negative impact on your credit, or it was going to, you know, and it's really for the city to decide if it's comfortable or not. But I don't, it fits right into to the plan going forward. That amount of debt, it's already built into the plan because the city's got a capital improvement plan that they shared with us the numbers, and we looked at how it could be structured, and the debt that's coming off, and the plan in the capital improvement plan for debt next year, and the year after, and the year after that. So we looked at the next 5 years. We looked at the model, and it can all be fit into about the same amount of debt service that you're paying right now, and you know, without increasing that. Now, one of the things about that, though, you know, if it's at whatever percentage is of the budget, say it's 5% of the budget, you know, it's important to kind of try to maintain it at that 5%, not to let it fall to 4%, because if it falls to 4%, you're probably going to use that 1% differential for something else. And then when you try to get it back up to 5 because you didn't use it right away, it's really hard to put it back into your budget, because you do something else, you're gonna have to go at that point. So it's important, that's part of the reason to have the fiscal policies and the debt policies, so that you can, you know, look at what's so-called affordable, which is a pretty subjective term. And even in any kind of a study about affordability, it's very subjective.
You know, I think particularly as we're talking about, you know, the taxpayers and considering what the tax burden will be for them, what you're saying is because of debt that's going to be falling off, we forecasted this out, but debt that's falling off, we're not, even though we're taking on over 52, you know, additional 52 million in debt, we're not going to be seeing, we're going to see consistency in what our bond schedule payments have been to what they are now. It's not like, just because we're taking on additional debt, other debt's going off, the payments you're saying are going to equalize.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much, that's not what's gonna squeeze your budget.
Yeah, and then obviously, and then us doing so, we still are below the threshold, so there's still additional capacity there. So I think when people say, geez, you're buying $52 million, those are really big numbers. We talk about the investment we're able to make with those projects, you know, citywide being able to tackle projects that have been deferred maintenance for decades, right? So I think that's important. You know, you see in the news a couple of our neighboring communities are looking at Prop 2.5 overrides. You talk about, you know, you often come before us and tell us to spend more money, and we have to go face to the taxpayers who are saying, please, our taxes are, you know, increasing, please don't spend more money. Yet the services that we need to be providing outside, you know, throughout the city are, you know, have infrastructure needs that we have to be addressing. So I think this is a good balance for you to, for them to hear your credibility in coming before us versus us, you know, communicating this, because these are questions I field all the time when we're out talking to residents. So I think it's important, while you say it's a decision we need to be with, for us hearing your comfort level and hearing it directly from you is very important for me and my constituents. So I appreciate that.
Well, all of this, just one comment about what you're saying, all of this kind of goes full circle, because the city's willingness to invest and maintain its infrastructure has a return. I mean, then there's a willingness for investors to invest in the city as well. And that's part of what produces more revenue for the city. You know, produce more demand potentially, but, you know, that's, I mean, it's complicated management of all the pieces at the same time. But you see, you know, investing in infrastructure is, you know, has a payoff in terms of, you know, comes full circle for us.
You know, we've seen great collaboration. So for example, we did a major municipal upgrade project at North Quincy High School expanding the campus. We did some flood control measures that are long overdue for that neighborhood, and it upgraded our own high school facilities, right? The utilities were upgraded at that intersection. The major intersection repair, we're talking about traffic and parking, one of the gateways to the north end of the city. And you see the private partnership that's going to go on with the MBTA across the street, and how that dovetails with what is happening in the city. So you're right, it is the public infrastructure that's partnering with this private investment that's adding a lot of value on return on the investment to our community. The last other question I just want to talk about, you know, we've had a lot of discussion about this, the OPEB and unfunded pensions. You know, the unfunded pension liability is something that we have a regular schedule on. With the 400 million, the OPEB is kind of pay as you go. The big number I think is difficult is that 650 million, what that entails. And I guess what I would just like you to clarify is kind of what the assumptions are here in what they're talking about within the industry relative to those, to how those numbers are being developed, if you want to just elaborate into that, because when we say 650 million, that would be in the aggregate, and that's not all coming online at one time, and how we're, you know, paying as we go and taking that down. So I guess if you could talk about kind of the assumptions as to how the $650 million number comes together, and what the industry is looking at relative to the development of those numbers.
Well, I only see the number. I have nothing to do with the calculation of that number. You really need to get your actuary to come in here and explain that number. And it's definitely a moving number. It gets reevaluated. And the assumptions behind it vary a lot in terms of how long people are going to live and that kind of thing. But I think that you should try to have your actuary come in here and explain it to the entire city council. Because I'm not an actuary, and I don't do that. All I do is take a look at the number and I say, wow, that's a big number. And then just take a look at what it would be required, and it's an ascending number, and it's ascending at a large number in terms of what would have to be contributed to start funding. And as it doesn't get funded, the number keeps changing because there's less time to fund it. So it's a number that, you know, there's a lot of different assumptions about it.
I guess that'll be something with the finance chair
Oh,
will look forward to.
absolutely. Be glad to organize that.
Nice topic. All right, thank you, Mr.
My
Chairman.
pleasure,
Appreciate your time.
Counselor. Counselor DeBona, take us home.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in today. It's good afternoon now, it's 12 o'clock. What are the avenues, Councilor Finn, what are the avenues to keep a double A plus rating? Now, I'll give you a couple of examples and you can tell me whether it's yay or nay, it doesn't assist to us. I mean, here in the city of Quincy, we're looking to propose to do over our parks with the hotel motel tax that won't go back on the taxpayer. Let me repeat that again. This will not go back on the taxpayer. A lot of the public doesn't realize that this is a fund set up that doesn't go into the tax bracket. That's the first thing. The second thing is commercial real estate. Is there a possibility that as the residential percentage goes down and the commercial goes up, does that help at all? And then third, our diff funding in the downtown. Do any of these factors factor in to help our double A plus rating?
Yeah, the double A plus rating reflects a lot of different things, but relative to the revenue base of the city, it's very important to consider how diversified that is and how many different streams of revenue there are and how they're being used, if they're dedicated to pay a particular kind of debt service like the hotel motel tax, or diff revenue as the new growth in the diff district is captured. It can pay for the infrastructure repair for the parks and everything that's in that city without it having to be borne by the tax levy itself. Whether or not water rates pay for water infrastructure repair, sewer for sewer infrastructure repair, CPA for those kinds of improvements. Those are all very diverse, different kinds of revenue streams, and besides just reliance on the property tax. So the rating agencies look at that, they look at state aid, they look at motor vehicle excise, they look at all the fines and fees and permits and building permit activity, what you're getting from all those, to offset what you ultimately have to tax. Now, how much state aid you get, how much, all of that goes into it. So the more diversified it is, it lends itself to, meals and rooms tax, it all lends itself toward reducing how much you ultimately have to levy, and it makes you stronger. Some of the areas where they're totally over-reliant on the property tax, which is most of Massachusetts, actually, unless you're really a wealthy base, then the property tax isn't necessarily going to, give all of the credit that you're looking for relative to your capacity to bond at favorable rates or whatever else.
So all three factors factor into the double A plus rating, or your rating in general?
They do. I mean, the primary things that are factoring is your local economy, and you get a very strong, you're seen as, a powerhouse in terms of the local economy, part of the Boston, I think it's the Boston, Cambridge, Newton, standard metropolitan statistical area in terms of what's happening with the economy. So you get scored the highest with that, and then your finances and management is another combined 50% of the rating. So if the economy is 30% of the rating, the finances are, and management, fiscal policies and things are 50% of the rating. And then the debt is all of, and that includes the unfunded liabilities, is 10% of the rating, but you get dinged with the level of pension unfunded liability and then unfunded OPEB. So you get further dings on credit on account of those liabilities, and not the debt levels, but the liabilities, the unfunded liabilities. And then the last 10% is how the state law works in terms of how municipalities are allowed to govern themselves, which is fairly conservative. You can't get into too much trouble. You have to have a balanced budget every year. You have to have a deficit that's permissible, which is only a couple things like final judgment or snow and ice. It's required to be raised for the next fiscal year, except in fiscal 15 rows. So the magnitude allowed it to be raised over a 3-year period, which the city's still doing, amortizing that deficit. So it didn't impact them just all in 1 year, even though it happened in 1 year. And we were fortunate since then.
I think we've done a good job with the catastrophic $11 million snow deficit that we had 3 years ago, basically, and we're still paying. We got 1 year left on it.
Right.
It's corrected, and that's the balance that we have to strike out there. And you said you don't live in the city. The striking balance of going back to the homeowner, the single family, the taxpayer, and so many times you can tap into that. The house values have gone up. And this past year we had an increase, and this year should be a lot better. We have a little bit more revenue coming from our commercial. But you were talking a little bit about the levy, and I'll be honest with you, I don't want to hear that. I mean, it's tough when you say that, and you're doing it, your data and your numbers from outside the city, you're coming inside of it. I have 3 children. I tell you, it's not easy getting a tax increase myself. Never mind some of the seniors that have an allocated fixed income and trying to keep them, into their houses as well with all different type of programs. But, as we're a growing city and we're doing so much redevelopment, we should be able to offset that. And I think this year we're going to be right where we need to be with all that. But you talked about powerhouse tax base. And I understand that.
Big tax base.
I know it's economically wise. I mean, you're looking at your numbers, but in a nutshell, when you get onto the street and you start to talk to the different people in the city, it's not always an appetite you want to have or a conversation you want to have, because with all this redevelopment in the city growing, we have roads and traffic and all these other things that we have to, as intangibles for the decision making of increasing or tax levy or increasing the taxes to the homeowner. So I always look at that balance and where can we strike that. My goal is to keep that tax for the homeowner as low or at 0 point. Is there ever a situation where you could get to that point where, and you have to correct me, but is there ever a municipality out there that's ever not taxed $0 to the taxpayer, the single family homeowner? Have you ever seen that out there?
Not really. I've seen some special programs for the elderly to kind of like offset some things. I'm not, I haven't, but I can tell you that where I live, I'm on the finance committee for the last 25 years, and I'm a town meeting member, and I understand the difficulty in terms of the balancing act that goes on, and the level of services. I mean, the reality, the bottom line reality is you have to manage what you have to manage, and that includes, at this point, every municipality. You got to maintain your infrastructure, you got to maintain your financial position. You wouldn't have your household with no savings. You have to have a savings for the city. You have to have essential services. You have to do what you can to get the revenues coming in. You got to manage the levy. You've got to, there's a lot to manage, but you can't just ignore the unfunded OPEB liability at this point. It's out there, and you have to levy what you can. I mean, it's a really difficult thing. There's a lot of places, my town included, where we are for every infrastructure.
What town are you in?
Well, I'm in Swampscott.
Swampscott, okay. It's right on the North Shore. It's
Yeah,
right next to Swampscott.
every time we run a project, we have to do a major project, we have to do debt exclusion. And that's the goal we're in at this point. Our taxes are very high. We're one of the highest tax communities in the state. And people are really complaining about it, a lot,
Sure.
myself included. I don't like the highest average tax bills. I think it's something like $80, $90.
And trust me, I understand. It's the services you get as well. We don't pay for trash, other amenities that we have in the city. The other municipalities, we have all-day free kindergarten, which is, in other towns and cities across the South Shore where they have to pay to go to kindergarten. So, I mean, these are the services that we have in the city, but it's tough when you talk about tapping into the levy. They're going a little higher on the levy.
I only say that because the city owes $600 million over the next however many years it's going to be to pay out all the healthcare costs that, if the actuary is wrong, and you have to redo the numbers, but if the actuary is right, the city is, all the communities are facing a big, huge, effectively like a tsunami. I mean, it's, you plan. It's like if I had a mortgage on my house, and it was ascending, so every year it was growing, I had to pay more and more toward it. I have to look at what's going on here. I'm going to run out of my ability to do that. I better plan ahead. And that's all I'm saying. I don't know how you want to balance your budget. I don't get involved in how you're balancing it, but I know that you need to adhere to having some reserves. You want to have the rating that reflects your capacity.
Sure.
And I would say that Quincy has that right now. Could you be a AAA? Maybe, depending on the decisions that are made in the next 10 years. But could you really fall? yes, if the wrong decisions were made about how you're doing things, you've institutionalized a lot now, so I think that's in place, and you're expected to adhere to these fiscal policies, so I wouldn't think things would deteriorate, but we have to maintain reserves, and sooner or later, as other municipalities are making at the same crossroads of taking a look at how do we deal with this OPEC business, whatever it needs, is to take a look at it, but as other municipalities start to deal with it more or less, you're going to be compared to them, and that's probably it's the biggest thing the city's facing dealing with, and it's probably the biggest thing that could impact your credit rating, other than if you didn't maintain your reserves at the same time, or maintain infrastructure. So you've got to do all that, plus provide services, and it's hard to prioritize and to get efficient, you need to put it all together. So every city and town is different.
I thank you for coming in today. A lot of it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. Okay, Cinda, thank you very much for coming on, a challenging notice. Thank you again to the council for everyone weighing in the morning session. We're going to recess. It's 12:12. I'll see you back here at 1